welcome to Pivot 2020. Good morning, good afternoon and good evening to the listeners around the world. My name is Philip Ball. I'm going to be your moderator today for this session. A little bit about me. I'm a new ventures geologist at Total E&P Americas. I'm also an honorary senior research fellow at Keele University in the UK. So I need to make it clear that the views that I will express today are my own and do not reflect those of Total. So with that said, I'm aware of a future energy transition that is occurring and the needs for us to decarbonize. In that domain, I'm developing a lot of my own activities in my spare time and research interests that are involving geothermal. They remain a personal interest at the moment, but it has not escaped my attention the considerable overlap between oil and gas activities and that of the geothermal industry. I think I can claim that I've been active now in geothermal for about 18 months. The current momentum, particularly surrounding Pivot 2020, is really exciting. And I really hope that we can continue these conversations together as we move forward. Now, so I'm very happy to be here today, moderating this panel. So this session today is going to look at the green drilling pivot, so career crossovers and opportunities. So the way we framed this session is that we asked the question, will oil and gas companies pivot into geothermal energy, leveraging their own workforces or to push forward, or will innovative geothermal startups grab the reins and scale rapidly, meeting our low future carbon baseload needs? So in this discussion, we're going to talk about what opportunities are there to leverage oil and gas expertise that is existing and that is relevant to the geothermal industry. What resources are out there to orientate oil and gas workers who want to change and who want to pivot into geothermal, and what are the challenges? We're going to look at career crossovers and opportunities. This is not just for the geoscientists. We've got drillers and we've got engineers and other disciplines that would maybe be interested in the crossover. So as we move forward, you may be currently looking for work, or you may be working in an oil and gas company, and you're looking around and you're looking at the options because you've all heard of the pending energy transition. So with that, today we've got a great panel for you. We've got 6 people who have pivoted and who really know what it takes to pivot. And so with this, I'll introduce the panel and then I'll ask each panel member to talk a little bit about themselves for 2 to 3 minutes. So starting off, we have Janine Vanni. She is the Executive Vice President of Evo Technologies. We have Tim Latimer, co-founder of Fervo Energy. Jody Robbins, a Senior Geothermal Engineer at the National Renewable Energy Labs in Colorado. We have Laura Mora. She is a Regional Sales Manager for Climon. We have Clinton Moss. He's President of Gunnar Energy. And Jamie Beard, who is the Executive Director of Geo at the University of Texas in Austin. So I would like to invite Janine to kick off, excuse me, her introductions.
Thank you, Phil. My name is Janine. First of all, I want to thank the organizers for their hard work at putting together this week's virtual conference, and I'm super grateful to be asked to participate in the Career Crossover panel. I'm VP of Geoscience at Ever Technologies, Inc. We are a closed-loop geothermal startup company. Our technology really was born out of the oil and gas sector. We drill multilateral well pads to create a very large downhole heat exchanger, and we harvest the heat via conductive heat transfer. So there's no flow into or out of the rock. We have an operational pilot in the ground near Sylvan Lake, Alberta. We drilled it last summer. It took us 44 days. We drilled it on time and on budget, and we're very proud that we're operating within 2% of the forecasted thermal output. So a bit about me. I've spent about 15 years working in the oil and gas sector, mainly domestically in northern Alberta, developing steam-assisted gravity drainage projects and drilling cold flow heavy oil wells. My focus was primarily reservoir characterization for accurate wellbore placement, and that's fundamentally rooted in sedimentology. So my background is sedimentology focused. The geoscience team at Ever is responsible for the global market assessment from a subsurface perspective, and we work very closely with the business development team on market entry strategy. Throughout the course of the week here at Pivot, we've talked a lot about heating and cooling markets, and of course that 20% of the electrical grid that's still accessible for geothermal energy. And the reason I bring this up is it is a bit of a dramatic shift for an oil and gas worker to now have to locate their plant or their wells where their customer is. So that's one of the key, I think, differences that I've found coming into the geothermal sector and in our little team is we are in step with BD the whole way through. And that's, I think, is one of the key points I'll talk about today for the type of skills that we're actually looking for at Ever. So as someone who's made the pivot 3 years ago, I look forward to contributing my experience to the panel today, and I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, Tim, may I pass the baton to you?
Yeah. Hi, good morning, everyone. Very excited to be on this panel. This is something I'm personally very passionate about, given my own career journey. Like everyone here, I started my career in oil and gas. You know, I was born and raised in Texas. Studied engineering at the University of Tulsa, so especially during the boom times about a decade ago, it was a very natural move career-wise for me. It's kind of always been, you know, in my blood, so you'd say. And I worked as a drilling engineer for many years for BHP Billiton in the Eagle Ford and Permian Basin mostly. And I got to a point, however, pretty early in my career where the more I learned about climate change, the more I wanted to switch up my career and focus on clean energy. And at that point in time, my one real skill was poking deep holes in the ground. And so as I started my journey to figure out, you know, how would I transition to clean energy, when I learned about geothermal, it seemed like a very natural fit. And I did so because if anybody's worked in the Eagle Ford, especially the deeper wells, they're pretty high temperature, and we were having drilling challenges related to that high temperature. And so that's kind of how I stumbled into geothermal for the first time, was doing literature review and engineering studies on high temperature drilling, and found this field. So, I mean, I guess topical to this panel, I didn't quite know what to do with that. So I decided to quit my job and go to graduate school and learn more about geothermal and business and everything like that. So I quit my job in 2015, went to Stanford to do an MBA and also an MS in the School of Earth Sciences, where I could focus on geothermal reservoir engineering. And through the course of 2 years there, I met some really foundational people that joined up with Fervo, and we launched the company in 2017 with a specific focus on bringing some of the technologies that helped make shale work, horizontal drilling and distributed fiber optic sensing, to the geothermal field for the first time, and opening up a much larger resource. So Fervo is currently backed by venture investment from Breakthrough Energy Ventures and other firms. Breakthrough is a $1 billion clean energy VC firm set up by Bill Gates to address some of the biggest challenges in climate change. We've also been fortunate to get funding from the Geothermal Technology Office, RPE, California Energy Commission, a lot of research-oriented institutions for our work. And I think probably the biggest thing I hope we hit on in this panel that I want to communicate up front is what we've found is the best way to engage the oil and gas industry and geothermal is mutual respect. And one of the things I find about geothermal, the more we get into this, there are brilliant people in the geothermal industry, and it's quite a bit different than oil and gas. There's many similarities, but the wells are hotter, the rocks are harder, the wells are bigger, reservoirs behave a lot differently, and there's a lot that both groups can learn from each other. So I think one of the most important things as you think about career transition and the overlap between geothermal and oil and gas is certainly mutual respect between the industries, and I'm very much looking forward to getting into a discussion about crossover here.
Thank you, Tim. Jody, please, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jody Robbins. I graduated from Penn State with a petroleum engineering degree. I've spent 20 years in the oil and gas industry, starting with Texaco and then Chevron Texaco in New Orleans. Most of that has been spent in the drilling side. I started off drilling shelf wells in the Gulf of Mexico, and then spent several years in deep water. At that point, decided I'd prefer to live in Denver, and so have been kind of was on a path of smaller and smaller companies, and you know, kind of expanding the scope of what I did during that time, you know, to extend to completions, workovers, production, and even facilities. Then about a year and a half ago, I had been, you know, becoming more and more concerned with climate change and really the direction of the oil and gas industry. And, you know, I started looking around for something in renewables. And honestly, it started off looking at solar and wind because those are the first two that come to mind. Luckily, there was a job posting at the time at NREL for, you know, looking for someone from oil and gas with drilling experience. And so that piqued my curiosity. Did some light Googling and, you know, started reading about geothermal and just got really interested in the challenges. And so I made the switch about a year and a half ago to NREL. And it has been really an interesting learning experience. You kind of come in from oil and gas thinking, oh, well, we've already solved these problems. Like, this is not going to be that big a deal. And then the more and more you learn about them, the harder and harder they do seem. And, you know, I kind of echo what Tim just said, is that, you know, coming from oil and gas, definitely keep your mind open as to these challenges are considerable and different than what we see in oil and gas. And so at NREL, I'm working on a bunch of interesting projects right now. But the one that's you know, probably the most interesting and you know, relatable to what we're discussing here is working on a project with Tetra, using pulse power energy to drill through hard and hot rocks. And you know, that was part of one of the other sessions, and funded by ARPA-E. You can learn more about it there. But it's definitely been an interesting process, and you know, since the last few months, when things have gotten particularly bad in the oil and gas industry, a lot of people have reached out to me to talk about options and to learn more about geothermal. And so I'm really happy to be a part of this panel and to you know, discuss all of the different you know, different job opportunities and what is necessary and how can you also potentially pivot to geothermal.
Thank you, Jody. Great. Laura, may we pass to you?
Thanks, Phil. Hi, everybody. So my name is Laure Mora, and I'm a head of sales for North America for Kleiman, as well as the head of sustainable solutions for oil and gas. So Kleiman is a relatively new player in the geothermal field. It's a Swedish company, and we offer heat power solutions, i.e. like power plants for low to medium enthalpy geothermal wells, as well as waste heat recovery solutions. So like everybody on this panel, my previous career, about 15 years, was in the oil and gas industry. I was formation evaluation, so basically wireline engineer for Schlumberger in the US and in Middle East for quite a number of years. Then I left the field and starting sales roles, and I'm saying that because I think it's important also, you know, when we talk about geologists, we talk about drillers, engineers, but you know, they could be any entry door to the geothermal world, and mine actually turned out to be sales. So after this, I actually retrained as a drilling engineer with Shell in Scotland in the North Sea about 8 years ago. And at that time, I had been involved in high pressure, high temperature wells before, and I had started thinking about geothermal and starting being curious about it. And when I retrained as a drilling engineer, I was hoping I could find a drilling engineering job in geothermal industry. And anyway, so this is how my career started. And after taking a break for maternity leave, basically, I really pursued what I really wanted, to switch to geothermal. And that's a little bit more than a year ago. That's when I found that job with Kleiman. And my big passion, and that's why I'm so happy to be part of this webinar series, because I'm extremely passionate about looking at the synergy and the bridges that we can have between the oil and gas industry and the geothermal industry and the renewable energy industry. So there's been some antagonism. I hope this is fading. I hope this is going away, because this is counterproductive. We'll have a big problem to solve. We know what it is. And we need to work together towards this one energy industry. So basically the way I see it is oil and gas needs geothermal and geothermal needs oil and gas, and let's work towards that. Thank you.
Excellent, Laura. Clinton, please, could you introduce yourself?
Hello, folks. Thanks for having me, Phil, fellow panelists. My name is Clinton Moss. I'm with Gunner Energy Services. I'm the president. A little bit about me. I started off in the industry in Western Canada as a measurement while drilling field engineer. So I worked on the rigs and progressed on to eventually be the global operations lead for Halliburton for magnetic ranging. Shortly after that, and for those of you who don't know what magnetic ranging is, it's basically using downhole tools to determine relative position between wells. Okay, so I was recruited from there to work with Wild Well Control in Houston, Texas, and that's interesting because that's the first time I was really in charge of delivering a closed loop. Now, what would that be for? Well, sometimes we have an expression of hydrocarbons on surface, we have a blowout, we drill another well and connect it to the first and pump around some fluid to abate that issue. And that is a closed loop, isn't it? Shortly after that, I started my own company and developed ranging tools. It was called Marksman Ranging. I sold that company to Scientific Drilling International. And that's when I first got into geothermal. In around 2016, Ever approached Scientific Drilling, and they had this thought of having multilateral intersections. So I was a part of the team that kind of proposed the technology and how we would do that through Scientific Drilling. And I worked with Ever, and I have to say that I'm continuing on working with Ever today through my company Gunner in the development of fit for purpose technology for closed loop geothermal. So a lot of similarities between what I did in my oil and gas focus and directly transferable skills now to my geothermal activities. So I think I'm well positioned to advise people then and hopefully engage in the conversation on how we can pollinate the geothermal with some oil and gas expertise where required. Thanks, folks.
Great, Clinton, thank you. Jamie, could you introduce yourself and what got you into geothermal?
Yeah, hey everybody, I'm Jamie Beard. I'm the executive director of an organization at the University of Texas at Austin called GEO, the Geothermal Entrepreneurship Organization. I'm a lawyer. I'm an energy and regulatory lawyer by training. I am representing the folks in the world that may not have technical expertise in this area, but that are really excited about it and want to jump in. And I'd love to try to be a voice to try to find an avenue to do that. My interest in geothermal started about a decade ago. I was an energy and regulatory lawyer at a big law firm called Wilmer Hale in Boston. I got the opportunity to join the executive team of a startup company, an MIT spinoff, that was doing high temperature ultracapacitor technology for downhole use, so for directional drilling. And I got really interested and dug in deep into the technical details of directional drilling technologies and also high temperature technologies in drilling. And about the same time, there was a report published that I consider quite visionary. It was the reason that I threw in on geothermal. A report published by MIT called The Future of Geothermal Energy. And it was the convergence of learning about high temperature directional drilling and that report that was my eureka moment on geothermal. Jeff Tester had a big part for me, a big role for me in that as well. He was publishing some articles back then around the MIT report that were just very visionary, positioning geothermal as an absolutely gigantic resource that if we were to kind of convene around it and really do some technology transfer into it from the oil and gas industry, we could make it happen. So anyway, I really threw in on it, made it a career goal. Next step after my startup, I went straight to the oil patch, right into the center of the drilling ecosystem, and tried to make a lot of noise. And that's where that was geo. And so here we are. I'm really excited to talk with folks today. My soft spot, and where I think a real silver bullet is the Clinton Mosses and the Tim Latimers of the world, right, that have come from oil and gas and that are out there being entrepreneurs. Really key. And I think that if we did that 10,000 times, we'd have the problem set nipped, particularly in terms of oil and gas expertise and technology transfer. But I also want to make a pitch for lawyers and business people and policymakers and everybody, because it's such an interdisciplinary problem set. So anyway, thanks everybody for having me.
Fantastic, Jamie. Thank you to everybody for those really good introductions. So people listening, you can see we have an excellent panel of pivoters here, people who are leading the way, which is really, really good to see. And I'm extremely excited to ask your questions to them. So with that said, you should be familiar with it by now. You have the opportunity as listeners to post your questions anonymously, or you can put your name there. If you would like it directed at a particular member of the panel, please do put that in your question. It makes my life a little bit easier. I see already questions flooding in, and we're going to take some of those questions really, really soon. I got given a really good one this morning, so I'm going to start off with that one. Okay. The question is, why is a transition from oil and gas to geothermal considered more different than from oil and gas onshore to offshore, or vice versa? Are one type of geology or another, they're the same, are they not? The fundamental principles don't change. What are your thoughts on that? And I'm going to pick on the geologist on the panel, Janine, to start us off.
I think fundamentally onshore and offshore, and Phil, we've talked about this in the past, you're a geologist, whether you're doing basin scale modeling and looking at large scale plays offshore, or you're working in a small field onshore. We're knowledge workers, and we have that ability to take any problem set and work through it. So I don't think that moving from oil and gas into geothermal in terms of a skill set is a challenge. I think we're well poised to do that. Certainly my experience, I didn't talk about how I pivoted, but I researched geothermal for 6 to 12 months and went down to the GRC, started networking, started to learn, and it was a whole new world, and it just generated I guess a fresh perspective and an excitement in me. And for the last 3 years, I've noticed you can directly transfer your skills. So if you're wildcatting in oil and gas, which doesn't happen as much anymore, it's not that different to wildcat now in a geothermal field. You still have to explore. You still have to know how to work in the field. You still have to understand structure, right? The rocks are different, but the problems are the same. So personally, I think the ability for each and every one of you watching today to pivot is there. And I think I'll leave it at that. I hope I answered the question.
That's good. Would anyone else like to have a go at this one? Jody, thank you.
Yeah, I can talk about on the drilling side. There is the skills are very similar. The companies are run similarly. You've got drilling engineers, you've got production engineers, you've got geologists. The challenges are different. Most traditional geothermal reservoirs, you're drilling into extremely hard granite. You're also drilling into extremely hot reservoirs. You're looking at up to 250 or 300 degrees Celsius, which is much higher than what you see in the maximum temperatures of oil and gas wells. The other huge difference is just the scale. I think over the last 5 years in the US, geothermal wells have averaged 14 new wells per year. So you don't get the swings, you don't get the at-bats that you get in oil and gas, where you have an opportunity to ramp up the learning curve. You know, if you're drilling a bunch of wells in the Delaware Basin, you can really apply learnings as you get better and better. In geothermal, you'll go out and drill 1 or 2 wells at a time, and so you've got to be on it from the beginning. And so, and you know, in addition, a lot of the drilling tools do not work at the higher temperatures, and so you're somewhat limited as to what you can apply to the wells. So it's very, you know, it's the same skills but different challenges.
Okay, good points. I'll offer it up for one more, or I'll move on. Got lots of questions here. Very good. Right. So one question I'd like to ask the panel is, how do we get oil and companies engaged in geothermal? I know Pivot2020 is clearly one way, we hope, but has anyone else got any suggestions? Laura, please.
Yeah, so one of the things that Climate is working on, and I'm working on quite a lot of projects at the same time, it's got a lot of interest from both majors and from also smaller companies, smaller operators, is sometimes a good way to start would be to look at co-produced fluid. So, you know, when you're producing your hydrocarbons, then you have a water and a hydrocarbon mix coming out of the well, which has a certain temperature, right? In certain conditions, and I'm thinking here especially about depleted assets, aging fields where the water cut is really high, then suddenly you're producing what is, you know, basically a bunch of hot water, and you don't do anything with it. And when you don't do anything with it, you still need to treat it, you still need to re-inject it, you can't just, you know, discharge it at surface and that's it. So I would say maybe a first step, a way to get your feet wet into geothermal is to start already looking at the co-produced fluids you have, and can you actually utilize that to produce electricity, to basically have already a small distributed geothermal power plants within your field and to electrify your field thanks to the hot water you're producing. And that's the solutions that Climate are really specialized in, because we're talking in general about low temperatures. So we're talking about 90 degrees Celsius, 100 degrees Celsius at most. And that's why maybe these low temperature geothermal solutions are not very well known yet. And that's why maybe a lot of operators are overlooking that. But I think this is actually a very good way of like a first stepping stone towards geothermal. It's minimum capex, you know, you already have everything drilled, everything in place. You just need to basically install the power plant, maybe an intermediate heat exchanger, and that's it.
Great. Tim, please, over to you. Tim, you're on mute. Thank you.
Yeah, apologies. Thank you. I think when you think about oil companies and their engagement, I mean, what are really the two things that oil companies need to see in order to engage deeply in geothermal? And I think they need to see a way to make money, and they need to see a way to do that at scale. And you know, that stat Jody threw out is kind of the current state of the industry in the U.S. I mean, 14 wells a year is not really what you think of whenever you think of large scale. So I think it's incumbent on the geothermal industry and the people on this panel and the different efforts to show that this can be a truly scalable industry. And I think one of the things that's really exciting about this is we are very well poised to do that. I can tell you, having been in this space for 5 years now, for the first several years, it was fighting an uphill battle, and there was no attention, no investment flowing into the space, no policy supporting it, at least in the US context. And in the last couple of years, it's changed tremendously, and investment is flowing into this space from all sectors, and it's early days, but it's really exciting. And I think about this in a lot of ways as, you know, if you were to go back to the mid 2000s and think about shale, you know, in those days, it was just a few small companies and a few believers and a few innovators that were, you know, producing things like the Barnett or the Bakken or other fields that were very early in the shale boom. but the ones that were inside the industry already saw the vision and knew that it was going to be totally disruptive. And I can tell you, we are there right now in geothermal. The forces are aligning. There's market traction, new investment, new customers signing up in a real way, and this is really the right time to get in. And so, in a very similar way to where I think a lot of the oil majors and the big movers in the space were caught off guard and surprised by shale and didn't participate until it was really, way late. I think we're in a similar place here. So it's somewhat, I feel like, almost an insider knowledge that geothermal is in the process of a major boom, and it's been fun to get in here early, and I think we're going to prove this out at scale in the next few years across all the different methods you've heard on this panel, and that's going to get the attention of not just people, but also the oil companies as a whole. And it's just fun to think about, being the ones who made shale work 15 years ago. That's where we are at this exact moment in geothermal.
Yeah, good point. Jamie, you had your hand raised. Please chip in.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to oil and gas engagement, the operators and the oil service companies are looking at this differently and at different paces. But one role everyone can play, and across all stakeholders in trying to assure that oil and gas engages as quickly as possible, is advocacy and recruitment. That's largely what I do in my role, is run out and find anyone that will listen to me, that is either in industry or has been in industry, and get them excited about the concepts. And quite frankly, what happens then is once they engage and embrace the concepts, they go out and recruit 20 more, right? 20 more folks. And what's ended up happening in some oil and gas entities is essentially a movement, a grassroots movement, right? Where so many folks have started talking about it in the ranks that it's worked its way up into the C-suites of some of these organizations. And it's happened very, very fast, like within a quarter, which is unheard of for some of these entities that are so large. So, a role that everyone can play here is to get out and advocate, because that's the way that we can really help push change within very large and slow moving organizations like oil and gas.
Yeah, very good point. Clinton, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of questions, so I'll just add to this one quickly so we don't get bogged down here. But, Tim mentioned, operator wants to know that they can make money. Well, I always look at everything through the lens of technology and delivering with fit-for-purpose technology on budget. So what is one of the ways that we can encourage our operators, multinational companies, to further engage in geothermal? Well, it's in pointing out that a lot of these operators have, for example, when we talk about ESG, like a closed loop installation, a lot of operators have already drilled that, not for the purpose of geothermal, but they've used all the technology to deliver closed loop subsurface installations for other reasons, like pipeline crossings or relief wells or plug and abandonments. So it's, I often point out that de-risking things from a technological viewpoint is important, and a lot of the operators, if they dig through their own data, will find that they've already accomplished a lot of what you need to do in a geothermal application to be successful.
That's a great add-on, Clinton. It's definitely been a theme of this week that actually a lot of the skills and a lot of the technologies do exist, and that we do need to bring them together. So I got a really, it's an anonymous question. I quite like it. It's from the audience. Historically, we do know that geothermal has been a little bit cyclical. It's linked to energy security issues in the 70s. It boomed with high oil prices. It boomed, but then with oil price dropping, there's a decline. So the question is, do you think if oil prices hover back to $100 per barrel, will people still like to transition, considering perhaps there are more perks for the oil and gas industry, and will people shift back from geothermal back to the oil and gas industry? Tim?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and we've certainly observed boom and bust in geothermal in a similar way to oil and gas. But what I want to encourage people to do is think about this over the long term, not necessarily, you know, if there's going to be $100 oil in 2021 or not, you know, but think more about the full cycle of your career. And I can tell you, one of the things that was very impactful for my decision on this, being a young engineer in the field, is I started thinking about my career, and I'm likely going to retire, you know, knock on wood, in the 2050s or the 2060s. And, you know, sometimes the most fun years of your career are the ones when you've worked your way up into a senior position. And when I started looking at projections for the oil and gas industry, and also the traction that Action on Climate is getting across all these sectors, you know, the question wasn't really, you know, what does the career look like for the next 5 to 10 years? But the question is, do I want to spend the last half of my career in an industry that's under so many competitive threats and pressure? And so can the prices go up and down in the near term? Like, without a doubt. Is that going to have an impact on the industry? Without a doubt. But if you think about the markets we're active in, and particularly in the electricity side, there are all kinds of groups that have already have laws on the books that are going to be removing hydrocarbons from the power sector entirely by mid-century. And every single day, more people, whether it's BlackRock from the finance side or different governments or multinational institutions, jump in and put more and more pressure to move away from this. So I was struck, even when you look at projections from oil companies like Shell, where they show oil declining starting in terms of production starting this decade, and gas declining not that far after that. And I asked myself, do I want to spend a lot of my career, my most exciting years, in an industry that's in decline, or do I want to join one that's growing exponentially? And that was very impactful for me. And I think you have to take that long view when you're building a career, and you know, you can't just be bouncing back and forth because the volatility of prices tends to send pricing up, you know, next year, because you have to be thinking about the full cycle of your career. And I can tell you, renewables is a fun place to be. Everybody wants you to win, and the pressure to address climate and solve this challenge only grows year after year. And it's a wonderful place to be part of that movement.
Good. Jamie, please.
So I've heard this this question asked, and interestingly, it's not coming from the oil and gas industry where I'm hearing this question. It's actually coming from NGOs, right? So they're, you know, it's the other side of the aisle that seems to have the doubt that the oil and gas industry will grab this and run and not dump it when it's in their interest, right? And so there are 3 reasons I think that this will stick. And it's all about a convergence of events, and a really, really cool and interesting and a very timely convergence of events. There's 3. One is the carbon neutrality commitments of the majors. The time is ticking on those, and they're trying to figure out how to make it happen, right? 2, geothermal leverages the core competencies of the oil and gas industry. And that is a really important point, right? Because anytime you can engage the core assets and workforce and intellectual property and everything that a company does in its core, it's a really good argument that they stick with it, right? Because it makes sense for their business model. And 3rd, and this one's really important, demand destruction from COVID, right? So all of a sudden in the industry, you have the smartest, geophysicists and petroleum engineers and all of this workforce that has been very, very important to be pointed at oil and gas work with less to do, right? And all of a sudden there's leverage and there's some bandwidth in these entities to put these smartest, people on this problem set. And once they get excited about it, that's gonna be a self-sustaining thing in oil and gas entities. I'm certain of it, right? Because it's a movement. It's becoming a movement within entities. So when you put these 3 things together, the neutrality commitments, the core competencies, and the fact that people have already started working on it in industry because they have the time to, I think what this will end up being is, yeah, say oil bounces and it's back $100. So what? I think we're gonna keep rolling. This is about momentum. So this is my hope, at least. So we'll see.
Great, Jamie. I'm gonna move on. There's an awful lot of questions coming in, and they're really very good. Doug C. This was actually addressed to Jamie, but I'm going to push it to Janine to start with. Janine, on your introduction, you talked a lot about how working in the geothermal industry meant that you had to work very closely with business and other non-technical departments. So this question says, how would a non-technical professional like an oil and gas landman help in geothermal? I understand permitting is an issue. And so as Ivor, as you are working around the world, how are you interacting with people who are landmen or other, I call them sort of non-technical disciplines?
Okay, well, certainly we employ landmen already. So there is a place inside of geothermal for the landman. It's not a full-time role yet, but the permitting is, as we've heard through the course of the week, Kate Young talked a lot about it. Permitting is a challenge. It's different in every jurisdiction. So we tend to find and seek out local people who understand the permitting system. We also really value the power of marketing and stakeholder education. And you don't really need to be a PhD geologist to be able to go out and talk properly about the energy sector and the benefits, the inherent value proposition of geothermal. So I think if you're really passionate about renewable energy and working in the geothermal business, I mean, you see Patrick Hansen with his company, Alex Richter has done similar things. Like you have to be that and live that, build your brand, and put your consulting hat on and see how you can kind of get involved in the industry. So we definitely, our company actually had less technical people for the first few months than we had in business. And I mean, business is technical as well, but it's not the same. And I can say you can't build and succeed if you just have the technical disciplines. It is a multifaceted, integrated movement. You all have to be in step with each other. You all have to respect each other's disciplines. And I learned that firsthand. I've never worked side by side with business development people, and it's really powerful. And it actually saves you time because I don't go just looking at the subsurface for the best heat gradient. I marry that with the, where is the infrastructure? Where are the customers? I mean, this is a challenge that we have to meet head on in this heating and cooling market. How do you secure an offtake agreement? There's a lot of ambiguity around that. The Netherlands, is very progressive. There's a big horticultural movement there, but certainly you're not going to be successful unless you are in with the local stakeholders and growers. They're not technical people. So there's always room for non-technical people, and I would encourage you to educate yourself and I guess be ready.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to keep us moving unless there's anyone who objects to that and wants to say a very, very quick 2 words. Perfect. Okay. This week we've heard a lot of different forms of geothermal energy and opportunities to develop power. The geothermal industry to date has been quite small. We've heard the term niche. And we've had a lot of discussion this week on rig counts, on the number of wells drilled. Obviously, it's a lot smaller than the unconventional US play. I think it's unrealistic to expect that everybody can get a job because we just are not at the same scale today. What is changing? What is innovating, and how is that really going to impact the job structure? Clinton, please, may I bring you to the table?
Yeah, quickly again, just to keep things moving, Phil, and I'll probably make the same point that some of my fellow panelists might make. But one thing that I see that is different is scalability of, for example, once again, a closed loop system, whereas previously we were dependent on geology looking for, hot, wet, porous rock. With a closed loop system, it seems like, I've heard 80% of geographical locations could accommodate that and have sufficient gradient for that, heat gradient that is. So Scalability all over the world will certainly help in bringing in, a higher rig count, more wells drilled, etc.
Great. There were a lot of hands up there. So Janine, please.
16. The number 16. That's how many active rigs there are in Canada right now. We're down. I pulled the Baker Hughes numbers. We're down 50% since last year. What were those wells drilling? They were pad drilling. They were pad drilling oil and gas wells in Canada. In the US, we're down to 260 wells right now from 1,000 last year. One closed loop system is 530 man years. That's one unit. That's 2 rigs drilling on one pad. You scale that to a 200 megawatt project in a manufacturing style play, 15,000 man years for 28 units. That is going to put your workforce back to work. And that is a fact. It is fundamental. And I believe that's where we're headed. The scalability for the closed loop system is a real thing. You still have to understand where your structure is. You still have to put, don't get me wrong, guys, a lot of geological work into these plays. It's different. You're mitigating geohazards. You're not looking for porosity, permeability. You're not looking for transmissivity and those things. So I believe we're there. And, and I'm glad that our secret is out, because we've been stealthily working on this for 3 years. So once we're successful in our Bavarian project, this is the scale and the amount of people we want to put back to work. I have to say that the countries you're working in does take the majority of the work, but there is a percentage that's going to be exported from Canada. So for all the Canadians watching, there is a place for you as well in this mix. Thank you.
Jody, you had your hand up, please.
Yeah, I'd also add into that. A lot of the recent learnings from drilling all of these wells in oil and gas has not quite made it over to geothermal. While there are some different challenges that I talked about earlier, a lot of these learnings can be applied directly. Over the last 5 years, you've seen more capable and bigger rigs with more pumps. You've seen in rather impressive advancements in PDC bits. You've seen a lot of focus on drilling efficiency through programs like Lean or the Perfect Well, or whatever the different company might call it. And a lot of these have not quite made it over to the geothermal side just because of the lack of wells that have been drilled. So I think there's technology. Yeah, some of the new drilling techniques, with lasers or plasma are super interesting, but right now, there is technology and learnings from oil and gas that can be applied to geothermal that can make these wells cheaper, they can drill faster, and that makes them more economical. And so, it's just kind of like I don't know what to. It'll just build on itself once we start applying these new technologies to geothermal wells.
Jamie, can you do it in 2 seconds?
Yeah, I just want to throw out the word startup and just pose the possibility to anyone that's listening that's got spot on oil and gas expertise. Just to build on what Jody just said, there's so much out there that needs to be transferred. How this is probably going to happen in the next couple of years is through startups, because oil and gas is kind of slow, right? And by the time they really bite, well, if you've built a startup now, if you start now, you're going to be ready to be acquired in 3 or 4 or 5 years, right? So go now, start a company, and aim your skill set toward the geothermal problems, right? And that's the way to really build and make things happen now.
Clinton, while we're on the topic.
Yeah, sorry. The other thing I just want to note quickly, it's not an either or binary choice. So, for example, my company is developing technology right now, and I already indicated, what it would be used for. Those same learnings, I can still apply them to oil and gas. So it's not like you have to totally abandon one stream in favor of the other. Certainly, you can pay attention and divide your time between both, because such synergy exists. So I just want to point that out as well.
That's great. There's a huge storm here in Houston, so I do apologize for any background noise. I am muting myself in between. Laura, I want to bring you in. I wanted to just step back a little bit from innovation discussions and starting companies. Before I get on to some more technical questions, linking geologists and geophysicists into geothermal. Laura, the question is really directed at you, and it's about not just technical skills, it's about the commercial and business skills linked to marketing, business development, communications, policy analysis. Can you talk about that, given that you really pivoted quite a lot from electrical engineering into sales, into geothermal?
Yeah. Well, yeah, so that's what I was saying actually when I was introducing myself. I really thought that I would pivot around my drilling engineering skills. And that's maybe what technical people sometimes are a bit bad at. They lack the vision of transferable skills. So let's say, you know, if you're, I don't know, a drilling supervisor, that might make you a great project manager in another industry, for example. Sometimes when we're technical, you know, we look at a certain set of skills and we can't see what else we can do outside of that. But look at actually what you've learned by doing this job and what that means actually in other terms for other industry. So yeah, the sales roles, for example, so you need the same skills basically in oil and gas. So when I used to be, you know, I was global account manager for Total at some point, you know, so I would be rolling out new technologies. I would be, you know, informing the client, putting myself as the trusted advisor for them, right? It's the same thing now. So now looking at, so we've talked a lot about drilling geothermal wells, so all the subsurface elements. Let's not forget also, you've got to do something with your heat. You've got to do something with whatever thermal energy that you're pulling out of the ground. So there's also a massive work to be done at surface, and that's also a lot of opportunities for people. So we're talking about building a power plant or building a district heating network. It could be, there's so many options basically. But yeah, so if you have skills in sales, if you have skills in marketing people also at the moment are really important in this industry because we're trying to put ourselves out there. We're trying to increase our visibility. We need people who can help us doing that, who can help us liaise with governments, with organizations that set new policies. For example, at the moment you have the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative. You know, can we liaise with this type of organizations to pull the geothermal up the rank up there as well? And that's when you're looking at the background of people who can do that job, it's extremely diverse. It's not just what we call technical. It's just, it could be lawyers, could be policymakers, as Jamie said, right? Sales, marketing. We need all of that to come together to build a big picture for geothermal.
Great, right. For the geoscientists among us who are listening in, lots of really good questions. I'm going to try to combine two questions here, one from Mark Savage and one from Neil Price. Okay. So what are the geoscience skills most required by the geothermal industry? And then as we talk about that, and as the panel answer this question, can we also consider what are the different skills for EGS versus closed loop? So Janine, I'm going to start you off on that one because it was originally addressed to you.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Oh, thanks very much. I guess I'm live now. So on the skills side, I think there's hydrothermal, whether it's sedimentary or igneous, and then there's closed loop. And then of course there's EGS, which is typically in a hard rock. So I think it does depend what setting you're in. If you're in a sedimentary basin looking to leverage your oil and gas skill sets, I think there is a component of hydrogeology that's extremely important. You need to understand the hydraulics of an aquifer, being able to map pore pressure, hydraulic head, understand the drivers of transmissivity. But you also need to understand sedimentology and where you might actually find that sand that's capable of delivering. So You know, again, these types of making these energy systems, you're in an integrated team. You don't need to know everything. Certainly when I was doing some conventional geothermal projects at night while I was still doing my oil and gas job, I didn't have that hydrogeology background, so I just hired out that one particular piece, but I relied on all of my sedimentology and mapping skills to do the rest of the contract. So don't despair if you're not a hydrogeologist, but it is fundamentally important. Geochemistry is also very important because whether you're exploring for these high temperature fields, you know, the first thing you're going to do is go look for a surface expression if they're not blind systems, and if you have to look at the chemistry of the water to see whether there's a high temperature system below. So there's a component of exploration. There's also that component, as Laura mentioned, you know, you've got surface facilities if you're looking at conventional geothermal, and corrosion and scale are really big issues. So you have to understand your chemistry for mitigating those. So I think those are some key skill sets. Obviously, geomodeling. There's been a lot of work done in oil and gas and reservoir modeling, and I think that's very transferable, and it's already being done in geothermal. And I just think that modelers can easily transfer into this. And geophysics and petrophysics are, again, fundamentals. And it doesn't matter. The geophysics for the hard rock is more gravity and mag versus, you know, for the oil and gas, we're usually working with 2D, 3D, or in the case of SAGD, 4D seismic. So all of those skill sets are really relevant. So I think I covered two questions in one there. But really it is the integration. And I guess I would just point out, there's always been a mining sector and there's always been an oil and gas sector. And people have gone between them. It's not a new phenomenon. Carbon capture is a you know, I guess it's been around a decade. And again, it's pivots from oil and gas geologists that have really done that. So yeah, I think that's I think we're well poised to make that pivot now.
Great. Tim, I'm going to let you have the next word. If we can keep it brief, we are getting short of time.
Sure. Yeah, I think Janine said it really well, and I'll just echo that. I mean, you think of within a large oil and gas company, just what a diversity of projects that you deliver. I mean, there's heavy oil, there's shale, there's deep water, there's SAGD. I mean, you're producing across geologies all over the world at depths that range from ultra shallow to ultra deep under all kinds of different conditions. And actually, when you look at the geothermal world, it's really no different. I mean, everyone, I think the first thing you think of when you think of geothermal is drilling straight into granite at like 350 degrees C. And yes, there are resources like that, but there's also resources that are, you know, if you go to there's a facility in Alaska that's producing power that's a really shallow sedimentary system that produces at 70 C. And so it's everything in between. And so if you have a skill set in oil and gas, I promise you there's a resource that needs your skill set, and it's true across the board. I think that's it, and it's just about finding your spot in this industry. And we have one of the things I think is our industry almost does as a disservice is we immediately always think about geothermal being granite deep 350 C or higher. Whenever you look at it all around the world, there's all kinds of geothermal resources, and so keep an open mind about that, because each one has its own technical challenges, and there's always a spot for people that know how to solve them.
Jody, please.
Yeah, I'll just point out really quickly, you know, I've mentioned drilling, but also, you know, regardless of whether you're talking about conventional hydrothermal EGS or closed loop, you're going to need reservoir engineers to understand what's going on downhole. You're going to need production engineers to deal with wells that produce up to 40,000 barrels of water a day. And you're going to need pumpers to deal with those wells in the field. You're going to need facilities engineers because you have significant facilities to deal with. I mean, you've got power plants and you've got all the piping that you need to move that water and steam around. And so and then of course you need operators for the power plant. So there's just a ton of different skills that are necessary for geothermal to work. Okay. Right, unfortunately, time is evaporating ahead of us, so I'm going to give us 5 more minutes just to start to wrap up. A lot of really good questions, and apologies to everyone that we didn't get round to all of them.
We will try to post some of those at a later date after the Pivot week. So as we move towards a wrap-up stage, have the panelists, and I'll let each of you comment on this. Do you have your favorite online resources for where you want to look up information that you, or where you would advise, excuse me, listeners? And then any advice on networking, and if we have the time, actionable steps that people can take if they are interested and want to pivot. Okay, Laura, your hand was up first.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, yeah, this is a question I really like, because this is actually how I found my job. I was forever educating myself, you know, on geothermal issues and questions, and I was on thinkgeoenergy.com all the time. I mean, all the time. I've been on it for years and years, and this is an excellent resource. That's how I learned about Climate, and that's how I went on Climate, looked at what they were doing, applied, and got the job. So, you know, and then you've got a Heatbeat blog from Jamie here, actually, which is also excellent. So you need, I would say, like, if you want to pivot from oil and gas to geothermal, and that comes back to certain comments of the panelists that say you need to show respect for both disciplines as well. Don't come into geothermal thinking you know it all already. Educate yourself. And in educating yourself, you'll find out actually maybe what type of job you're made for in the geothermal industry and what is your entry into the geothermal industry. So thinkgeoenergy.com, definitely, the Heatbeat blog, definitely, but also so LinkedIn. You know, there are hashtags now. Just follow hashtags, hashtag geothermal, hashtag geothermal energy. And wherever, you know, in the language of your country in general, there are also specific hashtags. I would do that because then you get notified. There are a lot of really interesting discussions going on LinkedIn. And I think that's also due to the fact that people are stuck at home with COVID-19 all over the world. So I think the discussions have absolutely exploded on LinkedIn, and it's a very, very good resources. And then, of course, networking events. I think Janine mentioned it already. The GRC is an excellent networking event. And on a bigger scale, you've got the World Geothermal Congress, the WGC. It was supposed to be in April in Iceland this year. Of course, it got cancelled, but I think it's in May next year. Yeah, so I would just attend these events. The geothermal community, from my own experience going in, you know, just like a year ago, is very approachable, because people are really passionate about what they're doing, and they're really passionate about the fight against climate change, and that makes them willing to share their knowledge a lot. So don't hesitate, go contact people online, go to events whenever the world will be able to resume that, and don't be shy and educate yourself.
No, I'm on mute. Beg your pardon. Tim, could we jump to you, please?
Yeah, I think that everything that was just mentioned, geoenergy, the GRC, that the websites in person is all great. I'll echo that. And one thing on the topic of crossover and pivot is, you know, we geothermal companies are no different than anybody else. We want to hire people that make a big difference and make big impact for our company. And there's a lot of ways to show that. And I'll just tell you the story of our first technical hire, our drilling and completions manager, Christian Gradle, who joined us after working for Hess and BP after about 15 years. And we met him because he submitted a paper and presented at the Stanford Geothermal Workshop, specifically on horizontal drilling for geothermal. And he did it, you know, on his own time. But his paper was so eye-popping to us and so great that I thought we have to have this person. And so I went to his talk, and we were able to recruit him and get him to join our company. And it was because not only, you know, did he have a great resume, but he also went out of his way to show his interest in this industry and add to the body of knowledge and engage. And so if you want to join this industry, and like I mentioned before, there's many spots for it, you know, reach out and show employers through potential employers through your efforts publications, networking, that you actually care about this and you're in for the long haul and you're driven by the opportunities in this industry, that you're drawn to the innovation that's occurring, the wave of investment that's coming in, that you're passionate about solving climate change, and then prove through papers and other things that not only are you a great resume, but you're somebody who can add value from day one. And I think that's something that's great to do. And he's been a tremendous member of our team, and we wouldn't have even been aware of him had he not made the effort to publish a paper on this specific topic and go out of his way to present at a conference. So I think that's kind of advice I'd give to people generally trying to find their space is become an expert in geothermal, read about it, interface with people, and get out there and show people where you can add value, and we'll be happy to hire you. I'll do a plug. We'll be posting a few jobs actually over the next few weeks. So that's one place you can look for job opportunities in this is at fervoenergy.com. So we're growing, and I think you're seeing a lot of companies here all across the space where we're riding this wave and upswing in geothermal, and there's going to be more opportunities than there ever have been before.
Clinton, may you had your hand up, please go ahead.
Sure. So just carrying on from Tim's point there. So, how do you get yourself out there? Well, here's an example of what I did. I wrote a patent, wrote a paper, applied to GRC, and I'll be presenting that this fall virtually. So that's an example of how you have to seek out these opportunities and engage. Now, let me relate that to how I got into this kind of niche area of magnetic ranging in the first place. Well, on the oil and gas side of things, we have what we call the Industry Steering Committee on Wellbore Surveying Accuracy, ISCWSA, which is an offshoot of SPE, the Society of Petroleum Engineers. Anyways, they have these conferences where they talk about for days, literally days, wellbore surveying, wellbore positioning, wellbore intercept magnetic ranging. And that's freely available to anyone in the geothermal world to look at as well. If you're interested in how we do these closed loops or how one might approach it, all the challenges have already been identified and efforts made to address those challenges by groups like ISCWSA. So you can leverage, once again, in your pivot, you can leverage the learnings of oil and gas. It's all available there for anyone. And then try to find the equivalent industry groups and peer groups in the geothermal industry. And a good place to start, of course, is GRC, for example.
Very good. Janine, please.
I don't even know if I raised my hand, but I was in my mind. We're hiring, plug. So yeah, no, we're hiring a senior geologist right now, and I think I agree with what all the panelists have said. In a small firm in particular, you need to be able to wear many different hats, and you need to be creative and be willing to problem solve and put your hand up for anything, basically. And certainly on the geoscience side, we need people who can slice and dice a lot of data, who are in addition to their very technical skill sets of geomechanics and planning these multilateral well pads. You need to be able to work with GIS systems. You need to be able to digest papers and take ideas and run with them. We're creating kind of our future as we go every day. So it's not just one technical skill set we're looking for. It's the attitude and the ability to just attack a problem. And the posting closed early on LinkedIn, but you can still go to careers@ever.com and submit your resume. Thanks.
I'm sure there'll be lots of people interested in that. Jody, please, and then we'll finalize this discussion with Jamie after. Jody, please.
Yeah, I think everything that everybody just mentioned they're great resources. You can also check out the Department of Energy website. There's a lot of good basic geothermal explainers there. I'd also recommend the DOE and NREL and some of the other labs put out a huge paper called GeoVision, or a report, I suppose, last year that really kind of spelled out the potential future of geothermal, and showed real ways we can get to 60 gigawatts or even 120 gigawatts, depending on what happens with technology and permitting and the regulatory environment. So I'd recommend that. And yeah, GRC is coming up. It's going to be all virtual in October, and that would be, if you can sign up for that and attend a lot of those technical panels, that would be a great place to start.
Sorry, and Jamie, please.
Thank you. Echoing everything and adding a little bit, the Geothermal Resources Council, or GRC, has a publicly available library through their website, as does Stanford. So there are two gigantic resources online that you can go and keyword search for papers that have been published in geothermal research and development. And so I would encourage everybody who's interested in this to read everything you can on both of those online resources. They're huge and they're up to date, and become an expert in leveraging those resources. I would also say geothermal groups are awesome. I would start also making some noise and opportunity within existing oil and gas entities like SPE. And in oil and gas conferences, submit papers to oil and gas conferences. There are, and Philip and I have actually experienced this recently several times, there is increasing interest at oil and gas conferences on accepting papers on geothermal. We've had several accepted over the past months. So do that too. It's a great way to engage more oil and gas voices in the conversation, and so we don't stay so siloed. I'll close and say also geothermal prize. There's $4 million available right now for people who are excited about this stuff. So everybody that's listening, Google the Geothermal Manufacturing Prize. It's a DOE sponsored prize competition that has an extremely low barrier to entry. Individuals can enter. For all of our international folks who are listening today, you need a U.S. partner, but you can participate in a team if you're an international entity or person. It's a 4-phase competition. It's really, really cool. You essentially leverage what you know about drilling to solve geothermal problems, and you can do so using 3D printers. So you don't have to have access to, multi-million-dollar prototyping facilities to participate in this competition. So I would really urge everybody that's interested in geothermal to get your feet wet by entering the geothermal prize competition. It's an awesome way to innovate and to learn, while at the same time maybe winning, and get this, $1 million in cash. If you win this geothermal prize competition, you win $1 million. So that's an awesome way to really launch, for instance, an entity if you're interested in a startup company. So thanks.
Yeah, Jody, you had your hand back up. Would you like to say a few more words?
Yeah, just real quick, just wanted to point out that that NREL is also hiring. There's some jobs posted now for a variety of positions, and there will be more posted soon to come. So, if you're interested in transitioning, check out our website.
All right, then I underestimated how much time we actually had left, which is great. So everyone was able to speak to that. And we've got one last question, which I think we can close on. I think it's it should be a fun question for you to answer. What challenges or surprises did you have to face when you pivoted from oil and gas into geothermal? So let's go around the table. Janine, thank you.
Well, my pivot was to a closed loop energy system, and so that was why it was ultimately so exciting. But the challenge was, and perhaps still is, people think we're crazy. So we had to work really, really hard to educate and convince people that you can do this, that you can connect these well bores and cycle this fluid through. And I think because it was new and different, it's good to have passionate debate and to be skeptical. And I think over time we met a lot of really skilled, smart people in both the oil and gas and the geothermal industry that over time, after meeting us several times in a few meetings, start to become more open. And so I think we're proud of the fact now that we can see a shift in people being more open to this concept and acknowledging that, yes, we're going to be expensive on the top end of the curve, but so was every other innovation in whether you look at SAGD in Northern Alberta, 30 years ago being funded by the Peter Lougheed government, or, as Tim has pointed out, in the shale plays in the US. We've done similar things in the Montney and the Duvernay in Canada. So I think that's been the biggest challenge is being so different, but and trying to educate. But also it's been enlightening to see how people react and respond and come back with a curiosity, and oftentimes with their questions make us better. So that was, I think, my biggest challenge.
Okay, Laura. Laura, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so my biggest surprise was actually when I went to the Geothermal Resource Council conference, in Palm Springs last year. I was so excited, and it was a great event, but that's when I realized that the geothermal world was quite small. So the first comment I heard when I arrived there was like, "You'll see, it's so friendly, everybody knows each other," which is like at the same time good and bad, because, well, we obviously need to be bigger than that. And I also realized why it took me so long to find a job within the geothermal industry is because it's a blooming industry, but it's still a small industry. So, but I feel that this is changing so much, and I'm so happy about that, because suddenly we're getting all this energy coming from the oil and gas folks who are looking somewhere else, So yeah, we need more people to come in, and we need to grow this business because it's an amazing business. So please come.
Okay, would anyone else? Tim?
Yeah, I'll just say, I think Janine's made this point well a couple times, but I'll just say the thing I found to be challenging, and now is something I think is the most exciting thing about this, is just how interdisciplinary the work is. And it's even coming from oil and gas, it's interdisciplinary on steroids. And it's kind of, it's shocking because you do have to think about your end customer. You have to think about your government incentives. You have to think about your regulatory and your financing environment from day one. And it's interesting that we have to even make, geological or well construction design decisions with things like the discount rate and financial incentives and end customer in mind. And it's something that I think was challenging to try to keep all of that under one roof. But I think everyone on our team actually loves how interdisciplinary it is, that we actually need all those folks in on the calls to make decisions. So if you're a fan of interdisciplinary work, you're going to love geothermal.
Great. Clinton and Jody, you're next, please.
Okay, I think it's my turn. Very quickly.
Sorry.
Yeah, great. Borrowing from some what others said and adding perhaps a little twist myself. The question was what challenges and what surprises. I have a challenge and a surprise. The challenge is what Janine said, which is this resistance to change, people saying that it can't be done. I still see when there's postings about advancements in geothermal, people will chime in and I guess they're uncomfortable with change, and they'll say, they express skepticism, but, particularly for closed loop, can be done, has been done. So that was the challenge, some negativity. And the surprise for me was that in executing this type of work, it was like any other job for me. So it was not, now that's for my particular kind of little niche world of connecting wellbores. It was just like any other job. But so, the challenge is the skepticism. The surprise was that, if we use all this skill set, all the tools that we have in the toolbox, we can pivot and deliver in the geothermal space.
Great. Jody.
Yeah, I think some of the biggest surprises for me were, seeing the size, seeing how quite small it was. But again, I think that presents opportunities for growth. And then also the regulatory environment, the fact that it is much more difficult to get a geothermal project permitted than it is to get an oil and gas permit. It kind of blew my mind. Definitely, yeah, just that was a huge surprise for me.
That's great. So we have blown our time. So thank you very much for everybody who is still listening. Thank you very much to the panel. to the Pivot team, to my excellent moderators who are working behind the scenes, the producers. And then, yes, to wrap up, I would agree with you. A year ago, people said I was crazy to spend my final project of my MBA looking at geothermal. In the last 6 months, I can say that it's changing rapidly. I have papers in press. I've had the pleasure to moderate an amazing panel of people who are leading the way in geothermal, innovating and joining companies that are hopefully going to change the way we view power going forward and view heat going forward. You're doing an amazing job. Thank you, everybody. We have missed a lot of questions. We will try to address those at a later date and post them on the Geo webpage. All the panel members, if people in the audience would like to contact them, we're all on LinkedIn. We're all available, as has been said with other panels. We're in this together. Let's work together and let's keep the conversation going. Thank you very much to everybody for your time, and be safe. And good evening.